It is 10:04. We can call the meeting to order. We have a quorum. And before we get into the first agenda item, I just wanted to explain sort of a change in a little bit in our process in running meetings. And actually, before I do that, I have to go through the public meeting rules. And you'll hear this at every meeting. So meetings of the ARPA Transformational Advisory Committee are public meetings as defined by the Connecticut Freedom of Information Act and should follow the guidelines of that act. And as it's being held virtually, it'll be recorded and made available to view on the DDS website. Committee members must make a good faith effort to state your name and title. And I'm Greg McMahon, ARPA, one of the ARPA coordinators for DDS. And every time that you speak during the meeting, you should say your name and role. If a committee member would like to speak, we ask that you raise your hand using the raise your hand function, and one of the co-chairs will acknowledge you. And there is no public comment portion to this meeting. Members of the public are able to join, watch, and listen only. So, and the slight change in the sort of management of the meetings is we've been informed that we were functioning as a subcommittee of the advisory committee. At least that's what we thought we were doing. But in reality, each of the committees or subcommittees are taking action and making votes on various agenda items. And so we are not in fact subcommittees, but we're committees on our own right. And therefore we have to follow the Robert's Rules of Orders. So that's why you heard discussion about whether we had a quorum or not. And Shannon sent an email earlier today about approving minutes. Approval of minutes aren't on this week's agenda, so they will be added to our next meeting.
Greg,
and we will approve.
This is Cheryl. I'm sorry to interrupt. Should we be recording?
The meeting is being recorded, Cheryl.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we will be voting on approval of minutes at our next meeting because we will put that on that agenda. It's not on this agenda. And we will also be voting, making motions, seconds, and voting on minutes, and also on adjournment of the meeting and any other product that we might produce that requires approval, we would vote on. So that's a slight change in sort of the process of the meeting, just to make sure that we're meeting the requirements of the public meeting that I just reviewed. So that you'll just notice slight change in how we're going to be running the meetings. It shouldn't change any of the content or discussion, but just a slightly different process. So with that, I'd like to introduce and move forward to our next agenda item, which is a discussion of supportive housing with Steve Morris from FAVAR, whose agency has been a lead in the state in developing and implementing and supporting people in supportive housing. And this is part of our educational process of learning each of the services that are going to be incentivized through our transformation process. So with that, Steve, you're up.
Okay, let's see if this share screen function works this time.
Yeah, you might have only had one chance.
I know. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, I thought I'd start with a little bit of history of how FAVAR provides over time apartment supports, because I think it helps inform how we got to where we are today with supportive housing. And our history is not so unusual from other providers, where back in the 80s, 1984 in our case, we started providing our first apartment supports to adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. What we tried to do back then is place people in an apartment setting, and then when somebody else came along that wanted an apartment, we'd place them in a different apartment, maybe on the other side of town, maybe in a different town, all with the intention of integrating people into the community. We didn't realize at the time that in many cases, we're actually isolating people from their supports. It took us at FAVAR 20 years just about to figure that out. But in 2006, we had a couple people in an apartment complex in Avon called Old Farms Crossing. And we made the decision to start moving some other people in there and create a cluster. Before a cluster was an official term, we wanted to give this a try. And what we found was that having a group of people integrated within a larger apartment community, provided lots of operational efficiencies, staff efficiencies, transportation efficiencies, and it provided a peer group for folks. In 2015, there was a development going up in North Simsbury called Ojakian Commons. It was being developed by a developer, Reagan Development, out of New York. And it was specially designed for people with
Yes.
Thank you, MS. Thank you, Mel. That's why I invited you to come along to help prompt me. So as you might expect, folks with MS need lots of additional ADA accommodations, and so they had things like extra wide hallways, extra wide doors, automatic doors, lots of accessibility features that you wouldn't see in a normal apartment. The town of Simsbury told the developer, again, Reagan Development, that they would approve the various things that they were proposing if they would let some people with different disabilities into the complex. So that's how FAVAR got involved. We have 8 apartments within this larger complex that was designed for people with MS. And really quickly on, I saw the benefit of this, what was called at the time specialty housing. It was designed specially for a certain population, in this case, MS. And so the developer and I started talking, and I said, we really ought to try to do something like this for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So shortly afterwards, he and I approached DDS with a proposal for what's now known as supportive housing. And then a year later, in 2016, the IDASH funding became available. We applied, we were awarded 2 of the grants. The first complex was completed in 2021. We took a lot of the accessibility features that we learned about from Ojakian Commons. We designed those in, as well as a number of other features that I'll talk about in a few minutes. In 2022, Lavender Fields and Bloomfield opened, in fact, just this month. And while the term supportive housing has only been used for the past year, all of the complexes that I've starred here are Avon Complex, where we have about 15 people living, Ojakian Commons, where we have 10 people living, Bear Woods, where we have 22 people, and Lavender Fields, where we have 19 people. All of these would be considered supportive housing. But supportive housing is seen by different folks in different ways. So here's how the Connecticut Department of Housing sees supportive housing. It equals, in their view, permanent affordable housing plus support services. And those support services can range in intensity to meet the particular needs of the tenant, and they should be flexible to ensure long-term housing stability. That's kind of a generic description by the Department of Housing. They actually work with all of these different state agencies, and they do supportive housing a little bit differently with each one based on the particular needs of that population. And you can see DDS down here on the right side. They're kind of a new player working in this arena of supported housing with the Department of Housing. So how does DDS define supportive housing? Well, that's a newly evolving picture, but as best I can figure based on our experience and interactions with DDS, it looks something like this. On the programmatic side, first of all, the apartments are affordable. And affordable, there's a couple meanings behind that. First of all, the apartments themselves are typically built with low-income tax credits, which means that the rent for the units, in some cases, all of the units, in some cases, some of the just the set-aside units are based on affordability formulas. Plus, there's often rent subsidy involved to make it very affordable for folks with IDD. It needs to be permanent, and by permanent, as opposed to temporary housing. So there's an option for long-term sustainability for those tenants, what we sometimes refer to as aging in place. There's also kind of a minimum size for the development. There's not really a hard, fast rule about this, but as you look at the next one, we're also talking about integration in a integrated housing complex. We're talking about no more than 25% of the apartments should be set aside for people with IDD. So we have some true integration. And in our experience at FAVAR, we find that at least 10 residents with in-home support funding need to be in the setting in order to make it an affordable, operational, programmatic system for us. So there's a minimum size, at least 40 people in the overall, so that we can have 10 people that we support. It's integrated. There's on-site support services. Smart home technology is utilized. And the other unique thing about supportive housing is that it brings together three important components to make financing possible. So there's capital involved. That's what brings the developer in. There's rent subsidies. That's what interests the landlords. And of course, there's service dollars to pay the providers. It's the combination of these three funding elements that make this workable. And why is this important now? Well, as you can see from this article headline, just last month, the vacancy rate in apartments in Connecticut is the lowest in the country. There's not capacity right now to do more apartment supports. And we found and demonstrated that a lot of people can't be supported and want to be supported in this type of an environment. But unlike the Avon experience that I mentioned earlier, it's really difficult to build it based on vacancies alone, particularly now. So the only way to overcome that is to develop new apartment complexes and build in the capacity. So here's a quick slide that shows the different types of residential support. So supportive housing falls under IHS, or in-home supports. So here are FAVAR's latest two supportive housing developments. These are the two that were funded through the IDASH funding program. These are the two that we designed from the ground up with the developer. The one on top is the Canton location. We call it Bear Woods. And the lower one is what we call Lavender Fields, and that's in Bloomfield. And here are the features that are built into both of these complexes. Again, there's the affordability component. There's the long-term opportunity to stay there and age in place. Again, the minimum size meets a lot of needs. It gives you a large peer group for the residents that we support, and it also allows them to make friends with the other residents because of the integration. The cluster funding, which is a component of this, allows us to have overnight staffing in place. So essentially, we have 24/7 staffing on premises. And again, when you have at least 10 people, we found in this setting, you've got service efficiencies. So you can have a manager and an assistant manager and all of the staff that you need to support the folks that live there. Again, it's integrated. And another word about integration, because we're able to design with the developer the layout of the apartments, we don't put all of the, in our case, the Favar apartments, in the same place. It's, we don't have a Favar wing. We scatter them throughout the apartment. We do use some strategy. For example, we know that sometimes the folks that we support can be louder than other tenants. And we've learned through our developers that sound is easier to control horizontally, from side to side, and more difficult to control vertically. So we will sometimes stack our apartments so that, we've got somebody on the first floor and the apartment directly above that is also our apartment, because we seem to be more tolerant of each other than other neighbors are sometimes. Just a strategy that we've learned. Again, on-site staffing, we have a staff office, and we have staff there 24/7. We utilize smart home tech. We're still learning how to do this in the most efficient way, like everybody else, but we have made some progress. And here are some other things that we've built in that are more unique to our Favar complexes. So we built in those enhanced accessibility features that we learned about through that Ojakian Commons apartment. We've built in a healthy prepared meal program that is an option for folks to have a healthy portioned meal, at least one, for dinner once a day, or as often as they wish. We have common spaces that were designed into these apartment buildings, and we plan and run inclusive recreation activities. And by inclusive, I mean we invite all of the residents. So whether it's bringing in some acoustic musicians on the weekend or a cooking class during the week, everybody's invited. And we find that helps create friendships, build bonds, and facilitate natural supports. And then again, the collaborative design process with the developer allows all of these features to be built in from the start. So the first one of these opened. It was our Bear Woods development in 2021. And you can see here that there are 6 others following along. So already we have 8 in planning and several others that will go, applications will go in this January for low-income tax credit funding. We have another one on the docket for that. And you can see where they are scattered around the state. So supportive housing, to summarize, is a new idea in terms of designing and developing an apartment complex from the ground up with the developer, where the developer and the partner collaborate to do that. We have to do it this way if we're going to build capacity within the apartment scene in Connecticut, because otherwise the capacity doesn't exist. But as we talk more about this and more people get interested, I think this is a great option for many people, as opposed to group homes. We'll always need group homes for some people, but this is an option that many people can take advantage of, enjoy, and be more independent, more integrated at a lower cost. So that's the presentation. You switch back, just give me a second to figure out how to do that again. Are we all back? Okay. I guess we'll open it up to questions at this point. And Mel Reno, who has joined us, is the parent of a young lady that has been living in one of our group homes at Favar for many years and moved into the Bear Woods complex in 2021. And she may be able to answer questions you have about how someone moving from a CLA group home setting into this new setting can work.
And this is Greg McMahon from DDS. Just a reminder as we move forward with questions to state your name and role. And I think we're ready to open up for questions. And Shannon, looks like your hand's up.
Shannon Giacovino, DDS Ombudsperson. Thank you for the presentation. So exciting. And it just creates so much opportunity for people. And, you know, I'm just incredibly thrilled and proud with the work that you're doing. Mel, I think, you know, when this presentation has been done before, the feedback that I've heard from families is exactly what Steve said. How does this work for someone who has a high level of need and who has been living in a group home, you know, with staff there all the time? I know that is the main question that I've heard from a lot of families. And so I'm hoping that you can address that and what made you decide to, you know, make this change in your daughter's life.
Well, Marie is living in basically one of the 3-bedroom apartments, which is basically considered a CRS. And so she does have 24-hour care when she's there. And in a bit, it's not much different, I would guess. I mean, I think she's been able to be more independent. The reason I chose to have her move into the apartment was she was living at one of the group homes for just about 16 years, and the age difference and the other occupants, it was between hers and she and them was quite large, between 20 and 30 years. And it was okay when she first moved in because everybody was, you know, able to go out and do things. But as time progressed and they aged, they were not able to do as much. And because it was a group home, they couldn't just take her out. So, and then COVID came, so that kind of did everything in. But we were planning on her moving prior to COVID. And so that was my reasoning for moving her, because I felt she needed to be challenged at this point in her life. And at this point, she's 42, so she was like 40 when she moved in. But we have found a great difference in that she didn't have great relationship with the clients that were in the group home because they were all in different places. So now she's in their lives. So now she's with 3 young women who were closer in her age, closer to her abilities, even though there's differences in their abilities. But what we're finding is you know, she just had her IP this week. So, I mean, they're finding that she's positive relationships with her roommates, and that she's gotten to be more independent. She'll, you know, pick up her dishes after the meals. And they tell me that she will put the laundry into the washing machine. She doesn't want staff there. She does not like them hovering over her. She wants to do it on her own. The only way they know she's done is when she slams the door shut. And, you know, she likes to, they're also, her program is walking distance, her day program is walking distance from where she's living, from the apartments. So on good days, they're either walk to the program or walk home for exercise. And, you know, when she was in the group home, she was always really hanging on to everybody, holding their hand, and they're finding she's willing to do that independently also. And she's been, she had started horseback riding, but then again, COVID had come in the way of that. So now she's doing therapeutic horse horseback riding, and she does that every week. And you know, then that too is helping her be a little more independent. So, any other questions? I'll try and answer. Thank you.
This is Steve Morris from FAVAR, if I may add to that. So what Mel has pointed out is that the supportive housing model allows for the CRS model to be blended in, and that's what we've done at both Bear Woods and Lavender Fields. So most of the apartments are 1 and 2 bedroom apartments that are supported through IHS or in-home supports, but we have 2 3-bedroom units in each complex. And they're run very much like a group home, with the exception that they're embedded within the supportive housing complex. We also, the 2 3-beds share an overnight staff. So there's not staff in the apartments 24/7, but there's staff available 24/7. And as Mel pointed out, it's a more independent setting in many ways because they're living with peers who are more independent. They have the opportunity to socialize with those peers who are more independent. And I think that lends itself to them wanting to be more independent as they see that in their friends.
Yeah, also it gives them more of an opportunity to go out, because if they're not, if their roommate might not want to do that, there's other, you know, the other group might be doing something that they could do. So it gives them more opportunities to socialize and go out in the community.
Not sure whose hand up was next, but I don't know if you're tracking that. This is Greg McMahon for DDS. I don't know if you're tracking that, Shannon.
Yes, this is Shannon Jacobino, DDS ombudsperson. Lena was next.
Thank you. Lena Esposito from Connecticut Family Support Network. I just have a couple of questions. I want to know, Steve, that you mentioned that there are 2 or 3 bedrooms per apartment. Then is every person has the own bedroom, or they're being sharing the bedrooms? And then the other question that I have is, what is the age limit that you guys have people? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for those questions. This is Steve Morris from FAVAR. So everybody in all of the apartments have their own bedroom, and there is no age limit. What we're learning is that the only type of individual that doesn't fit well into this supported apartment setting are people who have certain behaviors. And you would expect that in an apartment setting where people are living more closely together. Someone who's loud, and particularly unpredictably loud at odd hours isn't going to fit well into an apartment setting. So, you know, there are certainly some behavioral limits, but no age limits. The other challenge that we found out in terms of limitations that we're trying to figure out a solution for is that someone who uses a wheelchair, there's a safety issue with fire evacuation, and you need to have 2 staff on to get them out during an emergency. And we haven't been able to get past that because of the staffing ratios at the setting. We don't have that many staff. And so, you know, we need a solution for that we haven't figured out yet, so that people can indeed age in place or move in if they use a wheelchair.
Adriana was next. This is Shannon Jacobino, DDS ombudsperson.
Good morning, Adriana Ramirez, Connecticut Family Support Network. Thank you for your presentation. I had a question regarding how self-direction is moving forward. How does that work when it seems, from my understanding, there is a specific organization that's kind of running the services in that setting? So if you're self-directed and you want to be able to choose the agencies that are providing your services, how does that get integrated into this model, or does it?
Hi, this is Steve again from Favar. Good question. So one of the agreements that the provider makes at the very beginning is that we give all of the residents the opportunity to choose their own provider. We start off being the sole provider, but if at any point somebody wants to port their services to a different provider, that option is available and should be. And frankly, I think that's a good thing because it forces us to be the best we can so that people don't want to do that. And there's some benefit in having a single provider in the building for efficiency, and you can imagine if multiple agencies are working in a single apartment building, the confusion that could potentially arise. But that option is certainly there. For someone who self-directs, anybody can apply to rent at these apartment buildings and move in on their own. And if they have their own staff, there's nothing that prevents them from doing that. We've had some people do that, in fact, at Bear Woods. And so that opportunity certainly exists also.
Adriana Ramirez, Connecticut Family Support Network. Thank you for that clarification, Steve. That was really important. Some key points. I've heard a couple presentations, and thank you for that extra piece of detail.
Shannon Jacobino, DDS Ombudsperson. Greg McMahon, you were next.
Okay, this is Greg McMahon, DDS. I have a few questions, but on the role, what is the role of the 24-hour staff, and what is the payment methodology for them?
This is Steve Morris, Favar. So all of the supports that we provide are either CRS funded or IHS funded. We, as I mentioned, have staff on premises, essentially 24/7, but not always during the day. If everybody's off at work, we don't necessarily have staff there during that time. There's always staff in the 3-bed CRSs, and they share an overnight staff, as I mentioned. With the IHS apartments, we have, staff are assigned based on each individual resident's allocation of hours each week. Those hours are often shared, so we are now allowed in IHS services to have 1-person rate, there's a 2-person rate, and there's a group of 3-person rate. And so while that's a little tricky to schedule and coordinate, there's some efficiencies if we can figure out how to do it well, and we try. That also makes it more cost effective in some ways for the provider. And enticing providers to want to do this is really important. So it has to be affordable for providers, and the multi-person rates are a big component of that. Not sure I answered your question, Greg.
This is Greg McMahon, DDS. Yeah, I was envisioning that, say, overnight, that there may be one staff in the common area for available to others if something came up or if they needed it, but not necessarily assigned to any one particular person. And that was the payment piece. I was wondering how you pay for that person who may not be working directly with any individual at any given time.
So this is Steve Morris from Favar. Yes, so the overnight staff for the IHS supported apartments are paid for or funded through the cluster payments. So in addition to the IHS funding, there's a cluster payment, and that allows us to have that overnight staff. And in our case, we have an office, so they sit in the office. They use smart technology to monitor people. They can monitor whether doors are open and people know that they're there, and so they're essentially on call and available and do regular checks on people throughout the evening.
This is Greg McMahon from DDS. Thanks for the nice segue to my next question, which was to what degree are you using assistive technology to support people in supportive housing?
This is Steve Morris from Favar. We're trying to use it more. We've struggled a bit as the technology seems to be changing so quickly and rapidly. When we designed Bear Woods back in 2016, by the time we moved in, the system was already antiquated and the company had gone out of business. And so we've changed 2 or 3 times. We're currently implementing a system called Grand Care. They're out of Pennsylvania. We haven't fully implemented that system yet, but it's essentially a touch screen that goes in every person's bedroom. And there's also one in the common area. And it's both an integrated calendar of activities. It's a communication device with staff and or families and friends. And it also can monitor things like door openings, window openings. We have smart thermostats. We have electric blinds, so we can monitor and control the environment. So we have all of the features built in. We're still developing how to use them best. So the answer is incomplete because we're still learning and trying to figure out the best system for these group of apartments, which is kind of not the setting that most smart technology was designed for. Like, smart home technology was designed for a person's home or a person's apartment, not multiple apartments. So managing multiple apartments has been the challenge. And we think that this Grand Care system, who's really willing to work with us and has worked with another provider in Ohio, is going to be our best option going forward. So the potential is there. We're not fully utilizing it yet.
Okay, this is Greg McMahon, DDS. Thank you. And I have, I think, just one other question. Very often what we hear from individuals or families is this sounds really good for people who are really independent, but this wouldn't work for my son or daughter, that they couldn't handle living in such an independent setting. And this question could be for you, Steve, or Mel. You could chime in. How would you present this to a family with those concerns, knowing that, you know, there's some people who maybe this isn't for, but how would you explain that perhaps or address that issue to families?
This is Steve Morris from Favar. Mel, maybe I'll take the first crack at this and I'll let you follow up with your family experience. So Mel's example is somebody moving, her daughter moving from a group home into a 3-bed CRS. We also have people who have moved from a group home into a single apartment that's supported with IHS funding. So what we're learning is that this can indeed work for people who have lawn levels of 4, 5, 6, which is what we typically see. We have very few lawns of 2. Because this isn't really designed for folks with that level of independence. It's really designed for 3 to 4, 5, 6. You don't have any lawn 7s, but potentially that could work as well. What we're finding and what families are finding is that people really thrive with the independence. And one of the analogies my residential director here sometimes uses, sometimes you walk into a group home at night and everybody's in their bedroom watching their own TV, doing their own thing, and the staff's out in the common space doing paperwork. It's not that much different than an apartment setting when everybody's in their own apartment, watching their own TV. They may be within their own bedroom if it's a 2-bedroom, and staff is right around the corner available, not just with walking distance, but available through smart technology at a push of a button. So I understand it's definitely a leap of faith for families. Mel can talk a little bit about that. But I think the more that we do this and can show real examples like Mel's and others of how it can indeed work and how people actually thrive in a more independent setting than a group home, it's really, really encouraging to see that, and we are seeing it. Certainly not for everybody. I think group homes are always going to be needed for some, but I think this can work for a lot of people and a lot more people than we might think at first.
Mel Rano, a parent. My daughter is not very verbal when she wants to be, but she's not really very verbal. And I know when I decided to do this, it was really a leap of faith. I don't think everybody was really on board with me, but I you know, maybe pushed it. I don't know, but I just see where she is making so much more progress here. I mean, it is, like Steve said, is no different. Marie does not have a TV in her room because she does not watch TV. She has vision issues, and she's been using an iPad and watches everything on an iPad. So, I mean, she knows how to do that independently. And, you know, there's a lot of things that she probably can't do, but she continues to make progress. And like I said, she did have her IP this week, and you know, everybody felt this was a success story. So I think we have to kind of, I think we have to push our kids, our children a little bit. I think we all have to push ourselves to go a little further than, you know, we always try to make that next step. And I think parents should be willing to take the chance.
This is Shannon Jacobino, DDS Ombudsperson. I don't see anyone else with their hand raised unless you have another question, Greg.
This is Greg McMahon, DDS. No, I'm just having a hard time putting my hand down. There we go.
This is Shannon Jacobino, DDS Ombudsperson. I just want to make a comment. I was fortunate enough to attend the wedding of a couple of friends of mine who have apartments and are supported at Bear Woods. And I sat next to the table with all of their friends who also live in Bear Woods. And it was such a amazing event, not only to see my friends get married, but just to see, you know, the level of friendship and community that people have. And just, you know, I've known some of these people for years in different settings, and you could just see how well people are doing and how excited they are about their lives. And I don't know that we get to see that a lot. And it meant everything to me to be able to be there and to witness that. And so I wanted to put that out there and just, you know, say thank you to Steve and to Favar for providing those opportunities for people to have these amazing lives that they really want to have. This is Shannon Jacobino, DDS Ombudsperson. I see Adriana has her hand up.
Thank you, Shannon. Adriana Ramirez, Connecticut Family Support Network. I wanted to mention, because I have heard from self-advocates and families as they're learning more about the cluster supported living model. I know one of the requests that they have mentioned is to have hopefully future designs, and I believe based on your calendar, I'm seeing that to have these developments closer to direct public transportation, easier access to transport around. I have heard from several advocates and persons saying that the original ones aren't really close to a public transportation. Does that, I saw something maybe in Hartford and West Hartford. Is that what's happening moving forward, trying to develop in areas that are closer to that access? Thank you.
This is Steve Morris from Favar. So both of our designed settings, Bear Woods and Canton and Lavender Fields and Bloomfield, are both within walking distance of public transportation. The Canton public transportation system is, you know, obviously a little more limited, but Bloomfield, this bus stop for Bloomfield is, you know, less than 100 yards from the front door of the building, and it's a very robust system right on Cottage Grove Road. The next development that we're involved with will be in Farmington if it gets approved. And again, it's within walking distance. It's within sight of UConn Health and within walking distance of public transportation. So, you know, as the first of these projects, I can tell you that DDS has always emphasized the importance of access to public transportation. I can't really speak to the other developments because we're not intimately involved with those.
This is Shannon Jacobino, DDS Ombudsperson. Cheryl Ellis has her hand raised.
Good morning. Thank you, Steve, for that wonderful presentation. I actually don't live that far from Lavender Fields, and it's a very thoughtful location. It's right across from the plaza. Medical offices are right there as well. So I was just wondering how you chose the communities and the location, and how and if there's any preparation for the communities. Do families get to hear a little bit about the town? So I was just wondering a little bit about that.
This is Steve Morris from FAVAR. Thanks for that question, Cheryl. So, you know, again, this is a partnership between a provider and a developer, and the developer, with input from the provider, is the one that has the experience finding locations to build and sites. So I think that's an important component for providers to be aware of. You know, sometimes developers already have a location in mind. That's the case with our Farmington project that we hope to build. And we were brought in after the fact, after the site was already chosen. But we liked the site for all of the reasons that I mentioned. But I do think it's important to, at some point, to have some criteria and some guidance, both for developers and for providers, for things like this. Access to public transportation, access to medical facilities, access to grocery shopping, access to entertainment. You know, all of these things are important to know about a site, and I think could be part of the approval process, because DDS needs to approve the support services plan that should mention all of these things. That process is still being developed and tweaked and still very new. But I think those are all components that would be important to build into it in the future. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Oh, this is Cheryl, Director DEI DDS.
This is Shannon Jacobino, DDS Ombudsperson. Mel, I saw that your hand was raised and you took it down. Did you want to speak?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to Steve and answer your name because I think it's over it. A question. She asked how we went ahead and you know how we told the community, and I was sort of involved with part of that. And where Fair Woods is basically, it was property that was in the same, more or less, complex that FAVAR's main building office is at, and it basically was considered industrial land for industrial development. And so we did need to go to the town and get them to change the zoning for it to special housing. Not maybe that's not the correct term. Steve could correct me on that. And then, as in any other development, you present it to the town as, you know, at their meetings, and Steve and the developer did present, you know, exactly what was going to happen and what we were going to do there. And neighbors came. I mean, we had a lot of objections to neighbors who lived on the, you know, not $1 million houses, but much bigger houses that go up the road, who were very upset that this building was going to go up, and people who were low income housing, you know, what they were going to do with the neighborhood. But I have just let this past Sunday, one of the men who live up the street from me stopped me, and he said, and I know this man was at meetings, those meetings, the town meetings. He said, he said, it just makes my heart you know, I just love every day when I see them packing up, going with their lunches, going to programs, going so much different stuff. And because he said it's just so great. He was just so pleased with it. And he had a neighbor who, I mean, this man was going to sell his house. So he said, did your neighbor sell his house because of this? And he was laughing. But, you know, FAVAR has, with this project and every other one I've ever seen them do, always been willing to present it to the community and make them understand what was going to be there. And we always wanted to be good neighbors.
Thank you, Ms. Reno.
This is Greg McMahon from TDS. I just wanted to add it, and my computer is not cooperating with me, but FAVAR has been the really in front of this and really the first innovators of supportive housing, and have done amazing work and are still continuing to move forward. And they've kind of led the way, but there are other developments that are being opened up now with other agencies who are following that lead. And what I wanted to pull up and can't seem to do is the list of those other providers and other locations that are happening or in the works. There is some better statewide representation of down to northwestern Connecticut a little bit, down to southeastern Connecticut, with things either in the works or already going. This is moving along pretty well, and in many thanks to FAVAR for leading the way.
This is Shannon Giacovino, DDS Ombudsperson. I believe Steve had the list of the developments in his presentation, which we can share with everyone, and it'll be attached to the minutes of our meeting for, you know, any members of the public who might want to look at the presentation, and they'll be able to see that in there.
This is Greg McMahon, DDS. Steve, I think that list was the FAVAR projects.
This is Steve Morris from FAVAR. No, that list on the last slide of my presentation was all of the projects that have currently been approved in the state of Connecticut.
Okay, thank you. I think we have a additional list of in the works as well. So yes, thank you, Steve.
That list was one that I got from DDS and Josh Sklora. And I think it's all of the projects that have been built or are in the works.
Okay.
Now, there may have been others added to it in the last month or two, but those are all of, as far as I know, the approved projects thus far.
Okay.
And this is Steve Morris from FAVAR. If I might just add one other comment about how we got the community involved, and thanks for that follow-up, Mel. I knew there was another part of Cheryl's question that I missed. Another thing that we did that was a couple other things that we did that was helpful, that were helpful. One, we invited neighbors to come and hear about the first project early on when we knew there would be a problem in Canton with a, you know, not in my backyard attitude. And that definitely helped. The other thing that we did is we got parents and potential residents, current residents and staff in a meeting room before we started finalizing the first design for Bear Woods, and we got input. You know, we said, you know, what works if your son or daughter currently lives in an apartment? What would you like to see that, you know, we don't have a good solution for? And we got some great ideas out of that we built into the design. For example, excuse me, we've learned, and through that process, you know, one of the biggest challenges in apartment living is overflowing toilets and water leaks, because, you know, you got a leak on one floor, it drips all the way down. And so we discovered a toilet called a penguin toilet that has an overflow feature. And it's really a simple preventative. You know, it costs a few more dollars up front, but the amount of money and hassle that it saves in the long term in terms of repairs, you know, the developer immediately saw that it was worth the investment on his part. So, you know, depending on the setting meeting with neighbors can be important, certainly meeting with potential parents and others, talking to providers that have done this already and learned from their mistakes. It's always been our hope at Favor that people would learn from what we're doing and make improvements, because this is going to be an evolution. And I think that's the nice thing about supportive housing, is that it lends itself to innovation and transformation. You can add new things like the meal delivery program, much easier than you can through other types of settings.
This is Shannon Jacobino, DDS ombudsperson. Adriana Ramirez has her hand raised.
Thank you. Adriana Ramirez, Connecticut Family Support Network. I wanted to know 2 questions. How many individuals and staff support per project that you have that are open right now? And what is, if there is a wait list, I'm assuming there's a wait list, what does that wait list look like to access these projects and upcoming projects?
So this is Steve Morris from Favor. So Bear Woods and Lavender Fields are unique in that they have CRSs embedded in them. So we, from a staffing perspective, we treat the CRSs, the 3 bedrooms, separately from the IHS 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. So with the IHS program, we have a manager and an assistant manager, and we have an overnight staff funded through the cluster funding. As far as the number of additional staff hours, that's directed by the number of hours people have through their lawns. Further directed by how many 1, 2, and 3 person rate combinations we provide. With the CRS, we also have a manager and an assistant manager, and the staffing there looks more like a group home, based on people's lawns. But we typically have 1 person in each of the 3 bedrooms, with the exception of the overnight, where they share an overnight staff. And there's a second part of your question that I forgot.
Yes, so Adriana Ramirez, Connecticut Family Support Network. So yes, you answered the support staff. And how many individuals are currently being supported in these individual projects, like the two projects that you're mentioning? And is there a wait list, and what does that wait list look like? Thank you.
This is Steve Morris from Favor. Thanks for the reminder. I need to jot down the multiple questions because I'm not good at this. So at Bear Woods, we have 22 people total. So 6 of them are with the CRSs, and the other 16 are in the IHS 1 and 2 bedroom program. And at Lavender Fields and Bloomfield, there's a total of 19 people. So 6 in the CRSs and 13 in the IHS program. We don't technically have a waiting list. We worked with DDS to fill all of these vacancies well in advance of the completion of the projects. And I expect we'll do the same if our Farmington project gets approved. What we found, though, is that there's far more interest than we have capacity. So initially, and I don't think it was really well publicized, but with the limited amount of publicity and marketing and talking that went into the availability of Bear Woods and Lavender Fields, for the 22 and 18 slots, we must have had 100 interested applicants. And that's when, again, a lot of people didn't know about it. So again, that speaks to, I believe, the level of interest in this kind of setting.
This is Shannon Jacobino, DDS ombudsperson. I don't see any other hands raised. Does anybody have any more questions or comments? I don't, Shannon Jacobino, DDS ombudsperson. I don't see any more hands raised, Greg.
Okay.
Hold on, excuse me, sorry, Shannon Jacobino, DDS ombudsperson. Adriana has a question.
Hello, Adriana Ramirez, Connecticut Family Support Network. I apologize. I keep thinking of questions and I can't click fast enough before you say. What was it? Now I forgot what I was going to ask. Oh, yes. So, Steve, you mentioned that for the number of openings that you had over 100 applicants. What's the process of deciding who has access and gets granted one of these slots? Thank you.
I'm Steve Morris, FAVAR. So we were the first two projects, and so I'm not sure how DDS is handling it with the other 6 projects that are currently in process. I can speak to how it was handled in our first 2 projects, and we essentially handled them as, you know, a single opportunity because they were both being built within such a close time period of each other. So people who were interested, went through the process with DDS. DDS sent us the names of the folks that they approved. That's where the 90 or 100 people came from that we chose from. And then we did our best to pick people that we knew would be good roommates. And because we had some experience with them, because they were, maybe already in our day program or our employment program. And then for people we didn't know, we would try to get to know them because one of the biggest challenges is roommate matching. And most of the first 2 complexes we built were mostly 2 bedrooms. We had very few singles. So roommate matching was a big part of that. And I really can't tell you that there's a good formula on how to do that well. I think our residential staff have experience and good intuition about it. And I can say that for the most part, it's worked out. And for the few experiences where it hasn't, we've been able to either switch roommates or move somebody into a single and then bring in a second roommate where that 2 roommate thing didn't work out for the first person. So in our case, I think we're just good at it. And not me, the residential team here at FAVAR is good at it.
Shannon Jacobino, DDS ombudsperson. Lena Esposito has her hand raised.
Yes, Lena Esposito from Connecticut Family Support Network. Then I have a question for Greg. Greg, what are the requirements to apply to FAVAR? It has to be that a person is with DDS levels of needs. Did they have any kind of testing about behavior-wise or something like that?
This is Greg McMahon, TDS. This is to be admitted to, I'm sorry, I missed the first part. Admitted to what?
Yes, if somebody wants to apply to get the housing for FAVAR, what are the requirements for to apply for that? It has to be with DDS, the person, or
from our perspective, I believe
yes.
to be the Greg McMahon, TDS, to be eligible for services from FAVAR, and Steve, I don't want to speak for you. You would need to just meet the requirements of our department to be supported. In other words, you would have to demonstrate an intellectual disability or Prader-Willi are the eligibility criteria, and you would have to be made eligible and go through the eligibility process. But I think after that, anybody could apply to be supported by FAVAR or any other agency for that matter in terms of support. But I don't believe, and this is where Steve can correct me, that they're supporting people without IDD.
Steve Morris from FAVAR, yes, that's correct, Greg. So our experience with our 2 IDASH funded projects in Bloomfield and Canton was that DDS pretty much approved everybody who showed interest and was referred by their case manager at DDS. And then it was left up to us, the provider, to choose among the larger group those that we felt would fit best into each setting and would be good roommate matches. The thing that we had, another factor that we considered between Canton and Bloomfield, Bloomfield is a more urban setting with a very busy street right next to it, Cottage Grove Road, and Canton is more of a rural setting with bears and wild turkeys roaming around. And so some people, because of their level of need or their safety limits and their ability to use public transportation, were more suited to one setting versus the other. And so we took that into consideration as well.
This is Shannon Jacobino, DDS Ombudsperson. I have a question, Steve. I would assume that people need to have residential funding already in order to be able to be eligible. And so, that would be, no, that's not correct.
This is Steve Morris from FAVAR. So again, I can only speak to the IDASH funded projects, which were essentially the first two demonstration projects. And so a lot of folks who were referred, that list of 90 or 100 people, did not have existing residential funding necessarily. Some of them did, but some of them were approved and they did not have funding otherwise. And they were approved for bare woods or lavender only and not in general, if that makes sense. So if they didn't get selected for bare woods or lavender fields, they didn't have funding to take someplace else.
Got it. Thank you. This is Shannon Jacobino, DDS Ombudsperson. I don't see any other hands raised right now. Does anybody have any additional questions or comments? I don't see any. So I'm going to pass it along to you, Greg.
Okay, well, again, I'd like to thank Steve and Mel for your presentation. I know we said, could you please give us 20 minutes, and you've given us an hour and 10 minutes, so I appreciate your time. This was very informative and I think helpful in helping us all understand what we're incentivizing in this transformational process. It's very informative, very helpful. So thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, this is Steve Morris from FAVAR. It's our pleasure, and thanks, Mel, for joining me. Again, we believe in this model. We believe that it can be a big part of the future service system, and we want to see it evolve and expand, and we want to do whatever we can to help that.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Okay, well, this is Greg McMahon, TDS. We'll continue on with the rest of our agenda for the meeting, and so long, folks. Thank you.
Thank you.
So our next agenda item is committee open discussion. I believe we look to use this time for general questions. Also, the opportunity to have had a couple of weeks to digest what we've talked about in other meetings. If there's anything else that we need to do more with, or questions to get answered, things like that. But before we seek that feedback, I just wanted to, I think on in the last meeting minutes, there was mention that prior to this meeting, I would provide the incentives. And if you saw that, you realize I did not do that yet. With the draft we were given was a bit complicated. And I'm working with Peter Mason and Keith Lavalette, the two other ARPA coordinators, to try and have something that is a little easier to explain to folks. So we've been working on that, and we will, as soon as we're done with that, that will be forwarded for future discussions at our meetings. That is one of the largest goals of our committee, is how to talk to people about these incentives and communicate effectively to individuals and families. So that's going to be an important part of our discussion. But if you're wondering where they are when it said you get them, we're still working on trying to make them a little better for our group and other groups to digest. So if there are other comments or discussion people would like to have, or anything from the previous meeting that we want to look at or discuss.
This is Shannon Jacobino, DDS Ombudsperson. I see Dr. Ellis has her hand raised.
Hi, this is Cheryl Ellis, Director of DEI with the Department of Developmental Services. I just had a question in regards to the family communication. I know there is a plan to ensure that family members are aware of the options. Is there included in that plan a source of support for family members as their loved one transitions or goes into this different level of need for them? Is there any talk of that as part of the communication?
This is Greg McMahon, DDS. So you mean if somebody is somewhat like a support group or something of that to that effect for people who have chosen this or other options?
Cheryl Ellis, yes.
This is Greg McMahon, DDS. I've not heard that that is part of this effort, although I think that's a good suggestion, perhaps to stick a pin in for future discussions and communication as we make recommendations moving forward. But I've not heard, unless perhaps Shannon or anyone else has heard that, but I've not heard that.
So this is Shannon Jacobino, DDS Ombudsperson. I think it's up to us to make recommendations about what we think is important. I would note that both Pam Fields and at our last meeting and Steve Morris did talk about how important it was to be meeting with families and talking with families and really collaborating with families and individuals and, all throughout the process. And so, I think that those are important features and definitely important recommendations because, this isn't going to work unless families are on board. And that they're a part of the process and that they understand what's going on and that communication is ongoing. And so I think that's an important part of what we need to recommend in terms of communicating with families and individuals. This is Shannon Jacobino, DDS Ombudsperson. Does anybody else have any comments or questions or observations they wanted to bring up?
Hello, this is Kevin Arce, Self-Advocate Coordinator for DDS. Just want to say that I think that this whole meeting has been done very well. That's all I wanted to say.
This is Shannon Jacobino, DDS Ombudsperson. I agree, Kevin. I think it was a great meeting, and I see that Adriana has her hand raised.
Good morning again, Adriana Ramirez, Connecticut Family Support Network. I just wanted to follow up. Thank you, Greg, for mentioning the incentives. And I know you are looking to revamp them to make them, I guess, in layman's terms, turn it to something that we can talk about simply. I was just curious what the timeline you're looking at for that, or if there's any input as a group that we can actually look at the way they're written right now and give input how to simplify or what questions we have from the eyes of the different professionals that you have here and also our experience as family members with connections to self-advocates or groups of parents that we see in questions that we might be able to help with some of the language or maybe some questions that people may raise based on how they're written currently. Thank you.
This is Greg McMahon, DDS. I could send them out as they are. But to be honest, I work inside DDS and I needed, I did not understand them fully as they were presented to me. So I started asking questions and asking for different ways that we can present the same information. And we've come up with some things, and I think we're pretty close. I'm hoping for for our next meeting that we'll have something there. And if not, I'll send what we have so that we can talk about that.
This is Shannon Jacobino, DDS Ombudsperson. Lena has her hand raised.
Yes, Lena Esposito from Connecticut Family Support Network. I just want to ask if we can be more inclusive, if all this information can be traduced in Spanish, and if we can have something for the deaf and hard hearing too. Thank you.
This is Greg McMahon, DDS. Are you referring to the materials we're producing and the product of the committee?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think that's another suggestion that we need to do. And the other piece that may relate to that is we are, and probably could be on the agenda as an item, but I think it's also a discussion, is that we've talked about the communications contract that we're looking to work with a company that does communication and transformational activities that none of us necessarily, I can't speak for everybody, but most of us at least have no experience with. So we're hoping to have a provider chosen next week. We're meeting to review the proposals we have on Tuesday. And they will, related to your question, Lena, I hope will be able to help us develop materials that we can present in various ways, in Spanish, any other languages necessary for deaf and hard of hearing, and also presented in a way that is simple and clear for so that everybody can understand them, including some of the folks who may have a hard time with that.
Thank you.
This is Shannon Jacobino, DDS Ombudsperson. Dr. Ellis, I see your hand is raised. Is that a legacy hand or?
This is Cheryl. No, Ms. Esposito's statement made me think of something in terms of closed captions for our meetings. When they're played back, I just don't know if we do that at our meetings for ARPA.
Greg, this is Shannon Jacobino, DDS Ombudsperson. I believe we have a closed caption feature. And I don't know if it's something that we turn on or if people who are attending the meetings can turn on, but I think that that's a question that we should have answered.
So this is Greg McMahon, DDS. I just am asking, I just turned it on for this meeting. Can anyone else see it but me?
No.
No.
Perhaps on our agenda moving forward, we can give instructions on how to turn it on so that anybody who needs it can turn it on. I'm not sure I can turn it on universally. I don't see how to do that. Between meetings, I'll try and figure it out if that's possible.
This is Shannon Jacobino, DDS Ombudsperson. I just turned it on myself. Can you see it? Can other people see what I turned on? So I think it might make sense to see if you all have a button that says more with 3 dots. If you can enable that for yourselves. I don't know. We'll have to find out if we can do it for the meeting or if that's a feature that anyone who's looking, even at the video might have an option to turn on for themselves and possibly provide that explanation for people. So
This is Greg McMahon, DDS. I actually was fiddling with this on another meeting where we were talking about translation. There is the ability using this function to change into a variety of languages so that somebody can have captions in their language. For those of you who are fluent in another language, you might want to try it. My look at it was the translation was not particularly good. But people who speak those languages would know better than I. My limited Spanish speaking, some of it appeared very bad. So take a look at it and see if you find it to be useful.
this is Shannon Jacobino, DDS ombudsperson. Adriana has her hand raised. And I do want to just point out, we have a time check here. It is 11:25 and we need to conclude the meeting at 11:30.
Yes, good morning, Adriana Ramirez, Connecticut Family Support Network. I was just going to add on to, I believe the video replays are connected on a YouTube channel. Is that correct or no? Or are they through another provider?
This is Greg McMahon, TDS. I'm not 100% sure. I think they're through YouTube. I'd have to log on and look again.
The reason I ask is if they're on YouTube, it's not an all be all, but all videos you can, when you watch on YouTube, you can turn on subtitles. And it also depends on the clarity of the speakers, and people can change those subtitles specific to a variety of languages. And it also, again, the translation isn't like a translator sat there and typed out every single word, but it is a nice feature depending on the language that is spoken and how fast people speak, and if there's, slang languages, but at least most people can change the languages and add the captions and hopefully get the gist of the messaging. So they should be able to do that with the videos that we've hosted so far. Just wanted to add that information. And you could do that with all YouTube videos for the most part. Thank you.
This is Greg McMahon, DDS. Did anybody turn on in a different language to see if the translation was of use?
This is Cheryl Ellis, DDS. I tried the Portuguese translation and it did not translate.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. This is Greg McMahon, TDS. Thank you, Cheryl. Okay, we probably should move forward. We have two very quick items on our agenda. One is to make sure we're all aware of the next meeting on the 11th of October, 10 o'clock. It's a Tuesday, so it's outside of our ultimate regular Monday schedule. And we intend at the next meeting to have presentations, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Shannon, on the day programs that are part of the incentives, as well as CCH, which is the other residential living option we haven't spoken about yet. Did I miss anything there, Shannon?
This is Shannon Jacobino, DDS ombudsperson. No, I think that's it. I know that in a future meeting, we also wanted to invite Dr. Ellis to do a presentation that she's done for the other subcommittees as well. And so we'll reach out to you about that, Dr. Ellis.
Yes, this is Greg McMahon, DDS. That will probably be might be the meeting after next then, I think. Yeah. Okay. All right. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a slightly different process, and that process is, if there's no other discussion, that we ask somebody to make a motion to adjourn.
Adriana Ramirez, Connecticut Family Support Network. I motion that we adjourn.
Okay. Any discussion about that? Okay. Hearing none. All those in favor of adjourning? say aye or raise your hand.
Smile.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Anyone opposed? Anyone abstentions? Okay, so moved. The meeting is adjourned. We'll see you all on the 11th.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.